Look at this. Billions in tokenized assets just hit the blockchain. Aave is lending against real-world collateral. Circle's 635 million treasury fund just went live on Solana. What happens when this hits public markets? Right, so this is the first interesting article around Circle's expansion into the tokenized treasury space. Now, it claims here that it's expanding a whopping 635 million tokenized treasury fund into Solana amid rapid RWA growth. We are covering stories that pretty much every other week we are seeing more players, more tokenized treasury fund coming into the space. Now, this brings a regulated yield-bearing product onto one of the fastest public chains, which is Solana. The USYC, which is the ticker symbol for this fund, is now the fifth largest tokenized treasury product, bridging stable yield with blockchain scalability underneath. Now, why is this important? It's because it's fully registered under the US securities law, the same trust framework as the Circle's USDC. And in addition, BlackRock manages cash reserves, while Solana provides the on-chain execution underneath. This near instant yield accrual and settlement across DeFi protocols of $1 billion in tokenized fund circulation, proof of institutional scale adoption, offering regulated yield, real liquidity, and blockchain native access. Now, this is very, very interesting because, as I said, tokenized treasuries is one of the most important use case within the grand scheme of the real world asset industry. And I've explained in earlier videos why tokenized treasuries are playing such a pivotal role in real world assets. It's because governments are continuing to issue their bond instruments in the financial markets because they need to satisfy the constantly ever growing national debt that they're in. And that's never going to go away anytime soon. This is a growing trend. This is why there's always going to be a need to continue bond instruments, but on the blockchain, which is what tokenized treasuries actually represent. Right. Now, let me just show you an interesting chart that confirms the USYC product from Circle. Right. This is in addition to its stablecoin, which is USDC. This is actually different. We're talking about tokenized treasury on the blockchain. You can see from the list underneath that Circle USYC is 580 million on-chain TVL locked. This is the amount of capital that's been invested into the USYC tokenized treasury fund on chain, and it's the fifth largest tokenized treasury fund. So we're going to be seeing over time this list just keep getting longer and longer and longer, and not just in the case of US tokenized treasuries, which is what is shown here, but you have to take it within the context of the broader global tokenized treasuries. I need to dig out the chart for that, so we need to watch out for this, and this is going to be growing in the weeks and months and indeed years to come. So interesting. The next article is around Aave. Now, Aave is moving beyond crypto native collateral into real world asset lending. Its institutional lending arm Horizon has just announced it's integrating with Ripple USD and USDC liquidity via on-chain capital allocators. Now, this matters is because it's building yet another compliant RWA credit layer atop of Aave's $10 billion plus DeFi base. Is acting as a bridge stablecoin liquidity with off-chain collateral for regulated institutions. It integrates, as I mentioned earlier on, Ripple's settlement rails, the XRP, with Aave's credit infrastructure. It expands RWA beyond tokenized treasuries into what we're seeing now as real on-chain private credit. It marks the DeFi shift from speculative yield to credit-backed finance, such as real assets, real borrowers, and real liquidity. Now, I've actually, just to give you a sideline here, I've actually programmed DeFi projects on Ethereum, which is the layer 1, and layer 2 Arbitrum on the Ethereum network. And historically, there's always been this gap between DeFi lending borrowers like Aave, and there's other competing protocols like Compound Finance, DYDX, and Uniswap has its own native lending capability within the DeFi space, right? And I came across Aave. I've actually programmed Aave. What I did was I built an arbitrage trading bot on layer 2 arbitrage because I found it was cheaper from a transactional cost perspective as a settlement rather than Ethereum, which is very expensive and it's slower in comparison to its layer 2s. So what I did was I've used Aave to give me the actual lending, crypto lending that I need when I was swapping with another crypto. So that's how I came across Aave, and it works beautifully. So I can speak from first-hand experience that Aave for me is another important RWA coin project, and as a result of this announcement, it just takes it to the next level within the compliance regulatory space, because what it's trying to do is to capitalize its best in breed lending capability in DeFi and bringing it into the mainstream to institutionalize its capability on TradeFi and integrating that with Ripple settlement rails on chain, whilst Aave is providing more of a credit infrastructure capability to its institutional clients. So I know Aave very, very well. And if you ask me, what is another top RWA coin project that is now slowly but surely creeping into the regulatory compliance space, then it would have to be Aave. I've talked about Bitcoin as being the leading digital capital, Ethereum, Solana as being the leading programmable smart contract blockchain systems. We also have Chainlink, which is for me the king of all oracles. So that's the third one. And then finally, the fourth one, what I'm seeing at the moment, at least, Aave would be for me the king of crypto credit layer. So these are the four rather interesting vouched for RWA coin projects in TradeFi as it's slowly becoming adopted into the mainstream and used predominantly by these institutional players, which is so important because that's the whole point of these weekly desk reviews. I only touch on RWA coin projects that has reached a certain amount of block TVL, level of acceptance and adoption in TradeFi. And finally, where there's a lot of news and announcement that we're seeing into the coin projects. Those are the 3-point criteria that I actually use. And the purpose and value that I provide in these weekly desk reviews is to be able to help the investors to navigate through the noise and just hone in on the, what are the top vouched for RWA coin projects that has already reached a certain level of adoption and acceptance and in mainstream, because we're talking about tens of thousands of RWA coin projects. So this is very, very significant. I'm going to touch on another useful resource, which I think is very important that you know, and it's called DefiLlama. And you go into the protocol sections, and in lending specifically, it will give you the top ranked lending protocols in DeFi, in decentralized finance. And you would see Aave is certainly at the top of the list with a TVL of almost $38.5 billion. It's got revenues in the last 7 days and it's quite complete. And you've got some others that are nowhere near as big as Aave. You've got Morpho, SparkLend, JustLend, Compound Finance, as mentioned before. That's really down the list. It used to be really up there with Aave, but this was actually 2 years ago since I've last programmed Aave in the smart contracts when I was building this arbitrage trading bot, as I mentioned earlier on. So Compound Finance has certainly gone down the list. But these are all small fry. They're very small TVLs. Of course, this have actually incidentally grown to a much longer list since 2 years ago. That the most important message from this website is Aave is definitely the largest and is compatible with several blockchain systems. I used it under Ethereum and Arbitrum, which you can see is included in this list, but it's used in other blockchain systems, other layer 1s and layer 2 side chains. So really very interesting. As a sum up to today's episode, the reason why we're seeing the emergence of tokenized trades is because, as I said earlier, governments are continuing to issue their debt in financial markets in order to raise capital and to service their national debt. So that's never going to go away, and that's the reason behind seeing more announcements pretty much every other week of yet another tokenized treasury fund joining into the bandwagon. And to round off, Aave is gaining prominence and vouched for and accepted in TradeFi as it's trying to institutionalize its underlying crypto collateral protocol capability to serve the interests of its institutional clients. That's all I have for you for today. If you value clarity on Bitcoin, blockchain technology, and real-world assets tokenization, stay alert. Subscribe and enable all notifications to stay ahead of the curve. Share this episode with those who need to understand what's coming, friends, family, and colleagues. This channel aims to deliver insight, no noise, and no hype. Subscribe now.